Good morning, everyone. Lovely to see you this Thursday. Thanks so much for joining. Today we have our 5th webinar of our Tamarack series on system change learning. So we'll talk about community innovation, and Sylvia has some exciting tools for us to play around with and see how they might apply to our work with our core collaboratives here in Snohomish County. So I will let Sylvia take it away.
All right, thanks so much, Elise. So part of what I love about the work we're doing together is this opportunity to introduce you to some of the core practices that we believe build the foundation for lasting community change. And I have to tell you, the focus on community innovation is probably one of my favorites. I actually did a graduate diploma in social innovation at the University of Waterloo back in 2012, and that was foundational for me because what it did was it gave me the theories and frameworks to affirm what I was seeing as I was doing community change on the ground anyway. And that was, but then be much more intentional about what that could look like. And so I'm happy to sort of share some of that with you today. As always, just want to begin with an acknowledgement that we are meeting, each one of us, on Indigenous land, and that we're grateful to the generations of Indigenous people who have cared for the land and recognize that as settlers, the importance of recognizing the contributions and historic importance of Indigenous people is part of how we remain connected to, in our country, a collective commitment to the promise and challenge of truth and reconciliation, which is an ongoing learning journey for us for sure. In terms of looking at community innovation, I really want to, this is going to braid together some of the stuff that we've already touched on, but in a new way. And what I'm going to use are 3 different lenses to help build the case for focused thinking and strategy around community innovation. So the first is the lens of complexity. The second is how important it is to bring both programs and systems into our lens when we're thinking about community change. And then the last is really taking a bit of a dive into what we mean by community innovation, what we know about it, and how it's unique and distinct from other forms of innovation that you might see in the private sector, for example, and also really looking at the notion of human-centered design. And then we have one fun tool, which I will introduce to you, and hopefully we'll get a chance to play with. So you know me, you know that the community innovation is one of the 5 practices that we at Tamarack see as critical for building a container for community change. And it's the practice that invites people to rethink their current approaches and also intentionally introduce new practices and new mindsets to the work that they're doing in the community. And there we go. Let's dive in right away to the lens of complexity. So I've shared this with you before, I think, from the work of Brenda Zimmerman, that really talks about how critical it is and how important and valuable it is for us to imagine 3 different types of issues that we're often confronted in community, and to take the time to distinguish whether or not a problem is simple, i.e. we know what the answer is and it's about applying the formula or the recipe, complicated, meaning there's lots of moving parts and we may have to pause and figure out how the different parts fit together. But ultimately, once we do that, the type of problem that the solution is knowable and predictable and will last once we get all the pieces figured out. And complex as the 3rd type of problem, much more dynamic, much harder to kind of frame sometimes. And so at best, it's an unknowable problem. And the importance then of experimentation and learning from experience and trying things, prototyping things, seeing the response, and then adapting. For us, the distinction between complicated is really thinking in terms of a machine. So the metaphor is like sending the rocket to the moon or the clock where you can find a technical solution and you really lean in on the content experts to help you figure it out. Whereas the complex problem is one that resonates more in an organic kind of mindset, raising a child, you know, a forest, like the regeneration, the cyclical regeneration of a forest. Those are really good metaphors for the nature of a dynamic issue. And so in those situations, what we have to also do is pay attention, stand still, take a look at what's already happening, see what the attractors are, see, can we amplify something that's really powerful and positive in new ways, or do we dampen the attraction of something that is negative? And how do we nudge the system? Because we're part of that system, as opposed to thinking that we can come in and necessarily solve something forever. I love this notion of thinking in terms of systems change and simple rules. So, you know, the language of this and the example of the flock of birds is that in the field of biology, people were really curious. How come, you know, many of us have experienced seeing a single bird fly into a window, but rarely, if ever, do we hear about a flock of birds all flying into a set of windows at the same time. So what is it that's programmed into the DNA of birds and their tiny birdie brains that when they come together as a group, they're automatically getting to a place where they're much more effective and much more strategic than when they're alone? And we as humans struggle to get to that optimal place. So one of the things we know for sure is that if you take a systems view, relationships and coordinating between and amongst parts in the system becomes really important, and that living systems follow simple relationship rules. So, you know, when the biologists went out to figure out how come the birds don't, when they're in a flock, fly into a window, they realized that programmed into the DNA of birds are 3 simple rules for what happens when you go into a flock. And the 3 simple rules are: fly at the same speed as the bird beside you. Second rule, keep an optimum distance between yourself and the birds on either side of you. And the third rule for them is always fly into the center. So, building on this notion of, rather than thinking we're going to have a prescriptive answer and solution for everybody, and the importance of giving people simple rules, the Ritz-Carlton hotel chain several years ago had done a strategic retreat where they had decided that optimal customer service was the #1 focus that they wanted to pay attention to. And you can imagine, as a global hotel chain, they were serving customers from all over the world. So what would look like optimal customer service to me might be very, very different than what you would consider to be optimal customer service. And furthermore, how do you get all the different Ritz-Carlton hotel chains around the world, with all the diverse staff that represents, all kind of singing from the same songbook? Well, the leaders there decided, rather than writing a 1,000-page rule book of how you're going to behave as an employee to help us get to the strategic goal, they really glommed onto this idea of simple rules and said, what if what we did was gave people 3 simple rules that would guide their behavior in all kinds of situations, some of which we might be able to predict, but some of which we can't. And that if they follow these simple rules, it will give them the handrails they need to feel confident that they're making a decision that is in alignment with the broader corporate strategy. Way, way simpler in some ways. So the 3 rules that they kind of put out there for all staff were, #1, exemplary customer service is our #1 consideration. Rule #2, every single staff person in our organization has a role to play in helping us fulfill our goal of rule #1. And rule #3 was, every staff person in the hotel, if a client comes to you and asks for something, that trumps all other responsibilities you have. And frankly, you know how to navigate your system, your hotel, to find that person the answer they need, much more easily than leaving them to kind of figure it out on their own. And so those were the 3 rules that they gave to their staff, and suddenly, they had all staff across the globe kind of operating in a roughly coherent way that people felt confident about, because it gave them guidelines, but it also enabled them to tweak and apply those guidelines with a sensitivity to the unique context of their particular organization or hotel. Does that make sense? Okay, so you'll see complexity then requires us to take a fundamentally different approach to how we would address an issue. We want to act and learn at the same time. We will always be confronted with all kinds of paradoxes, and that relationships are critically important. We probably should try multiple actions or strategies and see what happens, amplify, build up the ones that are positive, tweak, adjust, and or stop the ones that are no longer serving us, and really give people the freedom to operate within simple rules or minimum specifications. Gives people a lot of confidence to contribute. And that's what's really important. Also love this. This is called the Stacey matrix. And it's another way of thinking about different conditions and why we need to operate in different ways. So you'll see on the bottom axis, close to certainty around what solutions are needed, and far from certain about what solutions are needed. Close to agreement means the degree to which we have consensus that something is an issue and needs to be addressed, versus, on the far end, no agreement or little agreement. And so, again, if you've got close to agreement that this is an issue we need to deal with, and close to certainty around how we need to deal with it, it's really just about operationalizing it. Complicated situations, we have a relatively high degree of agreement that we need to act on something, but there's not certainty. There's huge variance in what people believe needs to happen in order to solve the issue. So that's where we bring in the consultants, we experiment, we put the pieces together, and away we go. Political is, look at this, there's not a lot of agreement that this is even something we ought to address, and no certainty on if we were to address it, what would needs to happen. So really, in situations like that, it's about finding common ground, figuring out where we might have some bandwidth to work together, and taking it from there. You'll see the realm of complexity. We don't have a lot of agreement. We don't have a lot of certainty around the solutions. And so this is where we have framing. So we talk about what we think the issue is. We give people principles and rules, and we observe patterns, and we experiment and adapt and learn as we go. And chaotic is, no agreement, no certainty, things are just crazy, and that's, where you go into sort of emergency management and response, figuring out what needs to happen right away and dealing with those things as they come. So interesting ways to think about and understand why you need different approaches. Okay, so that's kind of the lens of complexity. Let's move on, and this is going to be a recap from some of the earlier workshops in some ways, but it'll take us a little bit deeper as well. We've talked about why it's so critical to think in terms of both programs and systems. And really, our work collaboratively, and what's so powerful about the 5 collaboratives that you're nurturing along, is that those are containers that create opportunities for people who are change makers and want to see positive change happen, regardless of their formal roles in organizations or in the community, to come together, better understand the issue and the system dynamics that affect it, and then really think and work together differently on trying new solutions and new approaches. Above and beyond what existing programs and services there are, what else can we try? Where are the barriers that we could work to eliminate, for example? So it really is about recognizing that programs will only take us so far, and that a lot of the complexity of the issues that we're wanting to deal with, the solutions will lie partly in adjusting and strategically changing the systems that are helping to hold the issue that we care about in its current state. So what are the things we can change that will loosen up how people think about this issue and adjust to changes? We've talked about this before. I love Karen Pittman's observation. The work of the program is really to help an individual beat the odds. But the work of systems change is really thinking about how do we change the odds for everyone. So different kind of framing question, different focus, but absolutely complementary. And what we know from work around collective impact is that the early wins of collective impact come from aligning existing programs and systems better, but rarely does that generate enough impact to get to the full kind of agenda that we're hoping to achieve. And so we really must move beyond just aligning systems to say, what is it that we need to change within those systems to create better likelihood that positive things can happen for the folks we're working with. We know from the folks at FSG, these are 4 common pathways to thinking about systems change. So increasing coordination between and amongst existing programs and stakeholders, learning through prototyping, kind of working together. This is the innovation piece, right? Trying new approaches on a really small scale, piloting something, seeing what works, learning from it, and then really looking for how can we amplify and grow either existing practices that are happening on a small scale that look very positive, and or amplifying some of the prototypes that we've begun to experiment with that are showing promise, and now replicating them in other jurisdictions, for example. And then lastly, it's about what are the policy barriers that we're going to work together to change, because those will also help change the conditions of the issue that people are being confronted with. I love this definition of a system. A system is a group of interacting or interrelated and interdependent components that form a complex and unified whole. A system's overall purpose or goal is achieved through actions and interactions from those components. So one of the things that becomes really challenging, like that old story of, the 3 blind men and the elephant, the challenge is we live in such siloed world that we can only see the part that's right in front of us. As these blind men can only touch one part of the elephant, they each have a fundamentally different assumption about what the elephant looks like. And there's really a lot of power in having us think about how could we change that view and take the time to bring these different folks together to co-create a new, more holistic understanding of the issue that we all care about. This actually is a beautiful story that illustrates why we need that systems lens as well. It comes from a book about poverty by David Shipler. And what they amplify is that every problem magnifies the impact of the others, and they're so interconnected that changing one element can create a chain reaction that none of us could fully understand. So, a rundown apartment with mold exacerbates a child's asthma, which leads to a call for an ambulance, which generates an ambulance bill that mom can't pay, which ruins her credit record. And then when she has to go buy a new car, it hikes the interest rate that's available to her on her auto loan. So she has no choice but to purchase a beater car that is unreliable, which continues to jeopardize her punctuality at work, which limits her promotions and her earning capacity, also worsens her anxiety and depression, and leads to her needing to take more time off, which is the thing that's confining her to the poor housing in the first place. Someone who isn't intimately familiar with the interconnectedness and wants to view this issue as a simple problem would say, well, why doesn't she just move? Her kid has asthma, she needs to move. But when you understand it in the fullness of the context you can see here, you absolutely appreciate why it's not just that simple as finding a new place to live. So, as folks that are thinking about working at systems change as well, the question isn't, like if we had a programmatic lens, we would sort of sit down and say, well, for this particular mom and her child, what are the things we could do? And between us, we could probably link together a really powerful pathway for this woman if she was open to it and had the resources and interest and had the necessary support. She could probably start a different trajectory for herself and her child. But if what we ask ourselves is, there are 10,000 families just like this woman in our community, it's not just as easy as linking that one individual to a host of different programs. It's really about saying, if we're going to positively impact all 10,000 families in our community, then what approach do we need to take? What are the changes that need to happen on a larger scale? And a few years ago, the folks at FSG partnered up with Peter Senge of the Fifth Discipline, a real system thinker, and they came up with this lovely graphic that talks about the levels of systems change and the journey involved in it. And the big question is always, what are the things that are helping to hold this problem that we're trying to fix in place, that we actually might have some capacity to shift? So the top layer is the explicit sort of structural changes that we can make around the problem. Sometimes it's about changing organizational policies or municipal, state, or federal policies. Sometimes it's about adopting new practices and replicating those promising practices across multiple organizations. And sometimes it's really noticing and looking for opportunities to change resource flows, investing in certain things as opposed to others, for example. And that, in the realm of system change, is really the easy stuff. The semi-explicit stuff, which is also equally important and valuable, and people talk about this in collaborative work, the value of the relationship, the connection, and the learning that happens when you bring diverse perspectives together. But the other dimension of this, which I want, sometimes we're good at dealing with, sometimes not, is the power dynamics at play. And I know we at Tamarack have hosted a couple of keynotes with a fantastic fellow from Chicago named George A. And he's with the Greater Good Design Studio. And he talks a lot about power and privilege and how unconsciously, even we who are change makers wanting to walk alongside people and make positive change can fall into patterns that make us susceptible to the power dynamics. You know, if I work in a foundation, for example, and the foundation decides that we're going to emphasize these kinds of initiatives over these ones, you know, how can do I have influence around shifting some of those, you know, those decisions if they have a cascading negative effect on some of the work I'm trying to advance? And or how do I frame it out to my community partners? These are the things I can do. These are the things I can't do. And work together and in transparency around that. And then lastly, the one that's much more subtle, but actually is it's the golden goose, I think, in terms of lasting systems change. And that's, how do we change people's attitudes? How do we change their mental models? That's when we know we've made transformational change possible, because people coming along after us won't even think about these things. Think about our response and the evolution of people's attitudes to smoking and tobacco over 25, 30 years, right? That's where you see the power of those attitudes and behavioral shifts. But along the way, there were lots of shifts in policy. There were lots of shifts in practice. There were lots of shifts in resource flows, relationships, power dynamics that had to be confronted in order to finally reach that place where tobacco has a very different acceptance in our day-to-day lives than it did in the mid-60s, for example. So there you go. That's just a further breakdown of really exploring what those dimensions mean and what's really going on here. All right. Going to move into the third of the three lenses now, and this is really the focus on nurturing community innovation and design. At Tamarack, we define community innovation as specific subset of social innovation that's rooted in place. And innovation, by its very nature, seeks to create something that's distinct and much more ambitious and uncertain than continuous improvement. We're also looking at how do we fundamentally change how we think about this problem. You know, what are the practices that need to be disrupted because unintentionally they're contributing to keeping the problem stuck. And it's as much a destination as it is a learning journey. And I think both dimensions of that are really important as you think about moving ahead with an innovative solution. At the core, it's really about staying in conversation and thinking about our issue in new ways, knowing that as I start to see the problem differently, I will be able to perceive a range of different solutions and options for addressing the issue that I wouldn't have thought about before. And the more options that I can see, the better and the more choices I make strategically about how to move forward. So a lot of the power of the collaborative tables that you've created is they become the containers for those really important conversations that enable us to really challenge our assumptions about the issue that we are hoping to fix. Knowing, as Albert Einstein has said, that's where we're going to find those new innovative solutions. And it really is about disrupting, being willing to disrupt the status quo. It's not about creating chaos, but really about challenging beyond just tweaking and improving what already is in place to fundamentally questioning and re-examining our approach. Disruptive innovations create new services that either provide low-cost alternatives to forgotten consumers in a market or offer a whole new market, right? You think about things like the iPhone and cell phones just generally, and how they've gone from, they've absolutely disrupted, you know, how we've thought about how we communicate with each other and what should be at our fingertips at any one time. That's a great example. Here's another beautiful example. You know, you think that distinguishes that notion of disruption from continuous improvement. If I'm Blockbuster, right, I have certain assumptions that I make about how my customers access video content, right? I'm assuming it has to be in a store. I'm assuming that I get paid for each rental and that there's fees based on, you know, if people are late. I'm dependent on this return so that I can continue to have a great stock that people are being able to access. And I think about my customers and working under certain hours. And so as if I had a continuous improvement mindset at Blockbuster, it's really about how do I, you know, get cheaper rent? How do I keep my staff costs to a minimum? How do I maintain or ensure that videos get returned by people promptly? What's that process and how do I make it better? But while they're busy trying to make their assumption about how people access video content better, along comes Netflix, right? Leveraging the new opportunities created by wide access to internet and saying, let's let go of what if we didn't even have to have a store? What if there's unlimited access to every video at every time and people are members and they pay a monthly subscription? We never have to worry about stock. We never really have to worry too much about staffing a bunch of stores, and we're open 24/7. In 2 years after Netflix appeared on the scene, you saw Blockbuster start to stumble, right? The environment had changed around them, and the disruption was such that the assumptions that they were making about their business were no longer relevant, and they disappeared, right? So it really is about what are the things, if we fundamentally thought differently about this issue, what would become possible. We've all seen it with COVID too, right? How communities have been able to come together and put solutions in place and make things happen that never would have been, you know, that people would said would not have been possible before the COVID crisis hit. Back in 2017, the Rockefeller Foundation did this fantastic deep dive into this notion of innovation, and they looked specifically at the nonprofit sector, interviewed more than 250 nonprofit leaders across the U.S. and found that 80% of them aspired to have more innovation than they currently had, but only 40% acknowledged that they had the organizational capacity and structure to really encourage innovation. And frankly, 50% of them said they were so busy fighting fires that even though they knew innovation was critical, they weren't really getting to it because they were caught up in the day-to-day. So the gift of this research is Rockefeller Foundation then went really deep and did lots of thinking about if a nonprofit really wanted to embrace this notion of innovation, what kind of capacities would they need to have? And so they've mapped out what each of them are, and they're in that visual there. You'll see, you know, you need a leader or a leadership team that really encourages that catalytic, let's give it a try, let's bring people together and figure this out. You know, a culture of curiosity where people's questions are invited, encouraged, and solutions. There's space to explore new solutions. The importance of bringing diverse individuals together as teams to problem solve, having a clear pathway to develop and test and prototype new ideas, porous boundaries that let information flow between and across departments, sectors, and organizations, and ready resources, innovation funds that are small bets that can help encourage the experimentation and the testing of new ideas that can then later grow. There's some beautiful tools and resources in that guide as well, and I'd really encourage you to take a look at it. I think we've talked about this before. My colleague Alan Mansky, real national treasure and social innovator, well-respected social innovator, talks about how any lasting change process he's ever seen is rarely driven by one individual, but more a partnership between these three different types of innovators. So on the one hand, the passionate amateur, the person inspired by necessity and love, it is their mother, their father who is experiencing this issue, and they are determined and driven by love to find these solutions and to absolutely refuse to accept what is currently available as the norm, right? And they alone are really limited in their capacity because they're not connected into the systems and they're perceived as well-intended but just disconnected. The
Sylvia,
second type, yeah?
Real quickly, we lost your screen.
I see that it's trying to reconnect. This is the love of, I don't know, I know you have this slide deck as well, right?
I do.
I wondered, yeah, do you want me to bail and then have you kind of set it up?
Okay.
And follow from there. Is that easier?
I can do that. It's just going to take me just a minute. So pause.
Okay. We're on slide 29, but I can kind of keep going if you like, knowing that the visuals will come. In earlier webinars, we talked about pathways for prototyping and the steps that you need when you've got, you know, an issue that you want to address. And so it's about bringing back that knowledge and really thinking about where are there small arenas that you might want to test and try something new, right? And you already have around your collaborative tables those three types of innovators, you know, the people that are experiencing the issue in community, who are the leaders from the community, together with yourselves as organizational leaders who can play an important bridging role. And then you're looking for those receptors within the existing systems and organizations to invite them into safe experimentation around new approaches. That's really a lot of what this work is about. And so part of it is, you know, many community change efforts actually come from chunking different issues that are important and related and working on solutions for one or two and then linking those together and then heading on to the next. So it's like you're building a cluster or a chain of innovative solutions. You're not trying to find the one magic bullet that's going to solve everything, if that makes any sense. Thank you. I should stop my screen share, shouldn't I?
No worries. I'm just trying to figure out how to potentially get this. Here we go.
You got it?
Yeah, I will just.
I'm back now. Don't you love it? There you go. There it is.
All right. Okay.
If you jump to the next one.
Okay. I'm just going to scroll down because I'm on the PDF.
Yeah, we talked about that pathway, right? Those are the pathways. So it's really about if you think about the whole issue that your collaborative is trying to fix, it can feel really overwhelming. But it can be useful from an innovation perspective to say, what are the critical shifts that we think need to happen? Inviting the community to prioritize which of these shifts we should work on first, and figuring out in your collaborative bandwidth, maybe you can tackle 3 or 2 right now, and then you get busy trying to identify the issue more deeply, framing a question, generating solutions and possibilities, testing new ideas, and moving that forward. That's really what this is about. Okay, if we can go to the next one. I love this. There's been a whole bunch of research to say, okay, so you've tried this prototype, this innovative solution, and it's worked brilliantly in one neighborhood that you're trying to serve. So now what? Really, that little prototype, that little innovation you have to nurture, and then you have to strategically think, how do we have it grow it so it has greater impact? And what they found in the work of social innovation is that there's 3 dominant pathways by which you can take a promising innovation and spread it out. So scaling up is the first, and that's really about, now that we have this programmatic solution that's working really well, what are the rules and or policy changes that we need to make, or the funding flow shifts we need to make to enable this kind of work to be much more sustainable, possible, and replicable in different places. Scaling out is saying, okay, this has worked in 2 neighborhoods. How do we now get it working in 5 or 6 neighborhoods or 10 neighborhoods, right? And the scaling deep is really about how do we use this prototype to illustrate the importance of changing beliefs. Going at people's hearts and minds and really shifting that culture and mindset that people have. I don't know if I shared with you before the incredible work of a collaborative in Cincinnati called Cradle Cincinnati that works with on the issue of reducing infant mortality. And what absolutely blew me away in a presentation about their work is that their then ED of their collaborative effort talked about how he had raised $9 million in 18 months. And he talked about while he was connected and could get himself in front of any corporate board in the city, he actually wasn't naive. He knew that at best they would give him 15 minutes on the agenda, and his challenge was, how do I talk about the issue of infant mortality in our community in a compelling way in 15 minutes? So he developed a slide deck on one sheet, on one slide. He had all the data about what they knew about what was contributing to the issue of infant mortality in their community, and they knew that there were 3 primary reasons. The first was about birth defects, and there was an acknowledgement that very little, that's not an area where there's a lot that can be done that's within their sphere of influence. The other 2 were low birth weight babies, and absolutely there can be lots preventatively done to prevent low birth weight babies, preemie babies. And the folks that were most vulnerable to having a low birth weight baby were teen moms in poor neighborhoods. So they were proactively, as part of this initiative, reaching out and building long-term supportive relationships to these young women as part of their work. And then the third had to do with unsafe sleep practices and needing to make sure that these babes in these poor neighborhoods had safe places to sleep, and that moms were supported and dads were supported to make sure that happened. So he shares all this information at the board, which is great. And then he says, listen, I could talk to you forever about this, but really, if you're interested in learning more or knowing more, I would just ask, is anyone interested in giving me 30 minutes of your time outside this meeting? And he says about 70% of the board will put up their hand. he says, you know, because we've been working with a lot of these young moms, one of the things I want we do when they come in and start working with us is we ask them to write a letter of love. A letter of love to their new baby, talking about all the hopes and dreams that they have for their child, also being brutally honest about the fear and worry that they have about fulfilling their responsibility to be a good parent. And he said, I have permission from these young women to share these letters with you. Everyone that's put up your hand, within 5 days, I will get you a letter from one of these young women. And as you read it, what I want you to do is think about all those times you felt down on yourself and unsure if you had what it took to move forward again, fulfilling your dream. And I want you to reach out and give this young woman some words of encouragement and let her know she's not alone, and really help move her forward confidently and let her know that she's got a community of support behind her. And the promise that was made was if these folks wrote the letter, then for sure he would make sure that they got the letter. And that for me was the most powerful example, because what it did was it shifted voluntarily people's understanding of the issue. Their attitudes, their beliefs suddenly get challenged because they're now actively interacting with that issue in a fundamentally new way. And that's what's really powerful. Okay, if we can go to the next slide in our deck. At least I know my system is kind of acting up in all kinds of nice ways today. I want to just talk very quickly before I move us to the last piece, is I want to just talk a little bit about what we know about human-centered design. So for those of you who know anything about the notion of product design, this is the notion of using those design principles, but putting the human that you're hoping to serve at the center and really thinking about how to design new approaches around it. It's a beautiful framework for creative problem solving, and it has some very clear steps. If you go to the next slide, starts with a belief that says that all problems, even seemingly intractable ones, are solvable. So, and that solutions are found by not knowing the answer and staying really open, staying focused on the people that we are designing for, and our commitment to design with communities rooted in the wisdom and assets of those communities, not doing for. And being able to hold space to allow people to ask the right kinds of questions and bring those different perspectives together. If you can go to the next slide, you'll see that there are 5 steps. So the first is you really ground in. So the process really looks like really zeroing in on generating lots of ideas, learning from the people who are experiencing the issue to begin with, and then generating as many possibilities as you can think of before you start deciding which ones you're going to act on. And then running through a filter of what's most desirable, feasible, and viable in terms of prioritizing what you want to experiment with. And here are the 5 steps if you go to the next slide. The first is empathy. So we take the time to really understand from the lived experience of the people what the contributing factors are that are most important for them in terms of the solution. Where do we want to focus on? Really defining that area that we are going to work together on as one subset of the problem. Ideate, which means brainstorming and generating lots and lots and lots of rich possibilities, and using that feasible, viable, desirable kind of frame to help us figure that out. Then we prototype small experiments and see what works. We take it out, we test it, we refine it. So really it's about learning by doing, having creative confidence, really expressing empathy and knowing that the solutions that we come up with have to consider the reality and wisdom of people experiencing the issue. there's not going to be one obvious clear answer. And so being comfortable with that ambiguity and just feeling comfortable to take a risk in trying something new, staying optimistic, even if the first attempt doesn't work really well, being willing to iterate and try again, tweak it, continue to move forward, and most importantly, learning from failure. So I'm going to pause there for a sec and wonder, any comments, thoughts, ideas, or questions on any of this content so far? I know things are wonky a little bit and struggling to stay connected. I don't know if you guys are all there. I'm hoping you are.
I was wondering can I have the PowerPoint, you know?
Oh, for sure.
Like if you send it to us afterwards or something?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, Julie, I'll send out this PowerPoint along with a recording of this talk. So
awesome.
Mm-hmm.
You know, one of the things that I didn't have in here, but I also think is really interesting, is the recognition that funders often also fall into that programmatic mindset. Like a lot of the grant systems are set up in terms of a programmatic solution and presuming that you already know the answer, and they're wanting to know what your outcomes are. And so one of the tensions that we run into often is that there isn't a lot of open funding that allows for this kind of experimentation and innovation. It's still very much caught in the program paradigm, and that actually can be a huge issue and challenge as we innovate. So one of the beautiful things, I think, when I look from the outside in at the work that you've done at the United Way and the long-term commitment to the collaborative, is it does give a different kind of opportunity and space for trying new solutions, and the very design of it, from my perspective, creates the conditions that enable you to work alongside the people experiencing the issues. So a lot of those very fundamental principles about human-centered design are baked into who's sitting around your table. And so really the challenge and question I would pose to you all is, how might you use your meetings and use engagement opportunities with other stakeholders to really bring forward, test, and get input around possible solutions, and let go of the sense that it has to be perfect before it gets launched, giving yourselves collectively permission to try new things and notice what impact they have. Does that make sense? All right. You know, I don't know if you can see the slide deck at the moment, because I can see my lovely system. I upgraded my Zoom to their newest platform the other day, and maybe this is part of the challenge. I'm not sure.
No worries.
But there is a tool that I would love to experiment with you about, and it's a lovely way, in a simple way, to really start surfacing in a fun way opportunities to change systems and or identify how we might eliminate unnecessary barriers. You want to give it a try?
Yeah. Sylvia, is it further? I'm scrolling down. I don't know if you can see the screen, but is it further down in this slide?
Yeah, if you go down to number 43.
Okay.
Slide number 43 is called TRIZ.
Okay, 41.
TRIZ has this, this is a facilitation practice that has this very long, convoluted Russian name, and so it's known by the term TRIZ instead, because it's easier for us to pronounce and remember. And so here's what I'd like to ask you to do. Thinking about the collaborative that you are part of, I want you to take 2 minutes and brainstorm, how could you design a solution that guarantees the absolute worst outcome for the people that you're trying to serve. Furthermore, guarantees that it wastes lots of resources, lots of power, and lots of resources, lots of money, and produces zero results. So I want you to just quietly, imagining the worst possible initiative, write down what you would do. How would you guarantee it? That worst possible outcome. Anybody have any ideas that you want to share? Just to spark some new ideas for others? Designing the worst possible outcome.
One thing I came up with was spending money on elaborate training and coercive events that isolated and dehumanized the students and separated them from feeling love and support and any positive feelings of hope.
Oh, there you go. I think that's a good one. Anyone got another one?
I was thinking about the participants themselves and felt that one of the worst things you can do is not include those people who are the people who are being served in any of the discussions or any of the development of the programs.
Fantastic. Yep, that's a great one. How about making them register every time they walk in the door and fill out a 5-minute form and re-enroll every time? What else?
From a logistical standpoint, I said to overstaff.
Oh, that's brilliant. Okay, so what you would do if you're facilitating this is you take those ideas and now you ask people to take a red pen and look at the ideas and think about how your organization and or your community currently operates in terms of how they want to address the issue that you're working on, and circle anything that resembles in any way a current behavior or a current practice. And then the third step, after folks have sort of circled what they think of as, you know, some of the things that unintentionally we end up doing, even though now looking back at it, it has aspects that will contribute to the worst possible outcome, even though none of us meant it. The question that you invite people to reflect on is, are there things that you are doing today that you could actually stop doing? Are there things that within our organization we have the power to stop, we just hadn't realized it or hadn't made the time to consider what needs to be stopped? And does this illuminate for you potentially some important legislative policies or organizational policies that need to change? And what I love about this exercise is a couple things, but one of the things I love, and the reason why for me it fits so well into this conversation about innovation, is that it acknowledges that sometimes we have to free up space from the things that we do day to day to make space for something new. And if we're going to need to do that, then let's be really intentional about zeroing in on and stopping the things that are actually working against the very intent that we're trying to address. But it allows you to do it in a somewhat fun and therefore somewhat safe way. So could you imagine, how might you imagine using this tool in a future meeting or in meetings with some of your organizational partners? Anybody have any ideas about that?
I would like to share it with our families because they are a big part of what we do every day. And it also makes me think about inviting a couple of the family leaders to join these meetings.
And see what they say.
Yes.
Yeah, beautiful. It is simple, right? But it could be very, very powerful. Anybody else have any thoughts or ideas about how you could use this kind of approach?
I think for a shared vision and a shared understanding, this would be really good if every single collaborator, no matter who they were, at least had this one set of presentations, so that we all singing from the same hymn sheet. So we're doing it from the same. Everyone's doing it and understands and doing it for the same way.
And I think one of the things that would be really powerful then in bringing it into the collaborative is focusing both on personally what can we stop, as well as organizationally what can we stop, as well as, you know, in the broader environment, are there policy changes that we need to work on? Like, I think it makes it very clear, very tangible, and easy to put into action, which is powerful. Well, folks, I think we're coming to the top of the hour. I want to thank you again and apologize for all these glitchy, crazy internet bits that are getting in the way. Know that you will get, after this session, the slides themselves. You'll also get a write-up on how to facilitate this TRIZ exercise. So between the two things, I'm hoping it'll be easy for you to take this and move it forward. And I just would like to just close up by asking to either type in the chat box or chime out now. What's one sort of idea that's really top of mind for you that you're taking away from this exploration of innovation? And if you wouldn't mind either shouting it out and or typing it in the box, I would love to hear them.
I'm seeing a real correlation between this and trauma-informed communities and that whole rush thing. So I think if we were able to marry the two, that it would really be beneficial.
What's the connection you're seeing? Help me see that, because I think that's fascinating.
Relationships. We know that when in a trauma-informed community, that relationships and connectivity between no matter who actually is a healing part of healing trauma. And I noticed again, it's that the relationships and the connectivity of the collaborations that really can make a difference. So it's that's where I see the connection.
Got it. Beautiful. Thank you. Anyone else?
Yeah, I would just add, again, I think my aha today was, one of our, I almost called her by name, but that she should be a part of this because she is taking the lead with our families and really creating a place of leadership in our community. So I can just kind of see her sitting here going, yes, this is, I think that, I don't think we can underestimate how powerful it would be for our family participants.
Wow, that's fantastic, Alan. You know, there really is, like if you think about your collaboratives in part as an opportunity to create a fresh space, to bring those different relationships together that wouldn't otherwise meet, and help focus thinking on the issues that they share in common and want to address, but in a way that helps them learn first, and then together identify with all the programs and services we have, clearly there's something missing, what else and what more can we, and then giving yourself that real permission to just experiment with one thing on a really small scale and see how it works, and then how might you grow it. I think that's hugely freeing in terms of moving this theory into action, which at the end of the day for me is what this is all about, right? Well, I want to thank you guys for the generosity of your ideas, for your openness around exploring this. So the last workshop, which is next week, I believe, we're going to look at opportunities to both track and measure and report on impact and kind of teasing out the difference between the measures, the evaluation and measurement system that you put in place, and then how do you harness those elements into a cycle of continuing to allow you to adapt and experiment with new ideas. And then our final session, the first week of December, is a deeper dive where we're going to think about integrating in a multitude of different ways the ideas around community innovation and the ideas around evaluation and learning and capturing that into the ongoing work of your collaborative. So thank you very, very much. And then over to you, Elise, to wrap us up.
I mean,
Thanks, Sylvia.
Yeah, thank you, Sylvia.
Oh, thank you.
That was a great wrap up. So yeah, I'll be looking in the coming few days for the PowerPoint slides, the recording, and then again, I feel like I say this every time, but there was just so much good stuff in this presentation. Be thinking about how to bring this back to our collaboratives and how, you know, Lark and Molly and I as a United Way team can support bringing that back to the broader collaborative so that we can really, you know, help these things to come alive in the work that we're doing. So
that would be fantastic. And can I add 2 more resources to the list?
Yes.
The one is that Rockefeller guide on how to create a culture of innovation in your nonprofit. Because there's lots of good resources in there in particular. And the second is a complementary piece that it's a research study that was commissioned by the Government of Canada that asked a human-centered design firm to the question, what would it take to create a social R&D infrastructure within the country? So it's like, how do you create the environment or the ecosystem for social R&D?
Wow.
And she has some really brilliant insights in there as well. One of which is that collaboratives are often the safer way to innovate than individual organizations.
Interesting. Cool. And will you send the link to that, the study?
Absolutely, to both of them. Yep.
Wonderful.
All right, folks. Go and have a beautiful day.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye, everyone.